Hello, Kevin.
Hi, Gordon. How are you?
All right, thanks. As if we haven't said hello to each
Yeah.
other already. You're all right.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Very good.
Good, good. Brill. So it's great to see so many of you again. And if you've been here for any of the others, I'm sure you'll know the sort of rough format by now. Kevin and I are just going to chat through our careers, but ordinarily, whereas I or Rachel have been asking the questions, I'm going to talk a little bit about my career and also then any sort of particular tips and advice, and then we'll answer questions. There's already a lot of questions, so we're going to go quite quickly through our careers and just get onto the sort of advice. And really, if there's practical things you want to know, I think that's a great opportunity here with Kevin's experience, and also then to be able to draw on anything that I might be able to offer. So, Kevin, do you want to go first and just give us a little bit of a rundown of your how you started, how you got into the business, the industry, whether you were doing another job beforehand or anything like that, and just take us through a bit of a journey on that, and then I'll do the same.
Yeah, for sure. And caveat: it's great to have a short brief on this because I hate talking about myself and my career, which is I never see it as a career. Yeah, I did a really mixed broad degree, which kind of did include kind of performing arts, but also kind of had a lot of kind of business studies elements to it as well. So it was a mixed kind of business and performing arts degree, and studied them in very separate kind of modules and separate ways, with the idea being that I didn't quite know where kind of my life, career would go. And yeah, I've always been kind of, attracted to the arts in the sense of what the arts can do, and the passion that I have around that, which I've hopefully still got today. So I then moved kind of after doing the degree. I actually then got a job in arts marketing. So that was kind of primarily for most of what I've done has been in arts marketing. So I've worked in all the glamorous venues of Yorkshire, from kind of Rotherham, Wakefield, Scarborough, Leeds. So I did a whole kind of tour of Yorkshire. And I was working at Harrogate Theatre as kind of their marketing manager and deputy chief exec. And we had a big Arts Council cut. And that was back in the days when the Arts Council gave you kind of 3 months notice in terms of when the cuts would happen. It's a bit different now. You kind of get 12 to 18 months notice. And it was quite a dramatic cut. At the time, Harrogate was full-time producing. So it went in 3 months from full-time producing to no producing. And so we had to, completely change the business model in a very short space of time. We went then to full-time presenting. And then slowly, over probably a 4 to 5 year period, we kind of built the program back up to producing and supporting kind of associate companies and emerging companies work as well. And I kind of spearheaded that. So that was kind of my move into kind of programming, producing side of life, really. So, and then I did that for quite a number of years at Harrogate before kind of then making the leap over the Pennines and into home in Manchester. And I've been there for about 7 years. So I was there working on the season pre the building opening, and then obviously through to home being built and being open, and to sort of where it is today. And yeah, and I think, where the arts are right now is a really, is another moment. I think it's another interesting, challenging period of time for the arts, and where the arts are around coronavirus and COVID-19. So yeah, does that work, Gordon, as a short précis?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, very good. Very good.
Right.
Thank you. And for myself then, so I'm from the south of England, originally from Oxfordshire. Grew up in a little village. Went to a comp down the road. I was quite a naive young person when I went to university. Hadn't experienced much of life. There isn't that much to experience in a village the size that I grew up in. But also, so then I went to Liverpool University, John Moores, that is. I went to Liverpool, John Moores. And part of the reason for going was a couple of people from the year above me had gone to John Moores University to do the drama degree. And then I also supported Liverpool Football Club. So it seemed like a good opportunity to connect with that. I did also support Oxford United, but they got relegated, so I had to go for a bit of glory hunting. Following that, I moved back home, lived with my family for a year, got a job as a typist for the council, for their legal department. I don't know how to type, but managed to get that job somehow, and bluffed my way through that for a year. But all the while applying then for arts jobs, and that was anything from trying to do performing, and I did a little bit with some mates in London on the Fringe, through to a Blue Peter presenter. I thought that was going to be my path for a while, but ended up with getting a job as an admin assistant for Complicity. And that was really a good learning point for me, because I worked in a small office, but we were touring international work and nationally. But I got to see all the different roles that there were, from the finance to the producer to the technical side, and we all sat in close proximity, so we all heard each other's conversations. I probably outstayed my welcome there a little bit, and then moved on to the Ambassador Theatre Group, who at the time had, I think it was about 12 regional theatres and equivalent in the West End, and I helped support the programming of those venues around the country rather than in the West End. Again, it was primarily an administrative role, but as I was there a little bit longer, I had the opportunity to sort of program one night things like comedians and so on. And then I grew a little bit disillusioned with that sort of world, the sort of commercial sector. So started applying for jobs, and there was one that came up at Frantic Assembly as their general manager. So did that. I was probably a bit young for all of these roles each time, a little bit inexperienced, and had to grow into all of the roles. And I'd say that was certainly the case then. Really enjoyed that again. Actually loved that. And then that was the first time that the responsibility, like greater responsibility, fell upon me rather than being someone's backup as such. I had to make decisions myself, and still in my 20s, so it was a real steep learning curve. Then I went to the Barbican to be producer, administrative producer. I think that was it, at the Barbican, which was a combination of producing and programming the international work that they put on there. That was fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed that. But it came a time where I had to put lifestyle ahead of career as such, and my to-be wife and I wanted to get out of London, so we moved back up to Liverpool, where we met at university, and got a job at the Everyman Playhouse, producing. And again, real steep learning curve for me. I hadn't produced that number of shows before. At the Barbican, it was primarily programming. So there we were producing 6 or 7 shows, if not more, a year, and then having to live with them. Some that would be there for the, like, you live with it for 3 months, and others that are still running to this day, actually still going out and about. So that was great. But again, I never liked to outstay my welcome, and so got a job running a commercial venue for HQ Theatres, who are like the smaller version of ATG, but they run, there's a greater focus on the hospitality side of what they do. So that included running a restaurant as well, and that was a learning curve for me. But truly, as I found working at the Ambassador Theatre Group, ATG, that I'm more at home, I feel, where the art is reflective of my values. Not to say that I don't appreciate the value of commercial work, I do, but I like to feel that would like to make a difference in the work that I do to a deeper extent than I felt possible in the commercial sector. So hence coming to Unity, where I'm now CEO and artistic director, and along the way I've done little bits of freelance work, like helped set up in Chester, I'm putting down there because I live in Chester, just down the road, there's an outdoor theatre that's part of Story House. Helped set that up for the first season, and regret not staying on with that. I enjoyed doing that, but yeah, so that's me. I think really the jobs don't always come about because it seems like the best next step because of career. It can also be economics. So you need to go for a job because you spent too much and you need to get a better paid job or the like, or it could be as you were saying, Kevin, that an organisation changes and shifts, and that's certainly been the case for me throughout this. Is that there's needed to be organisational development. That I've been fortunate to work with some pretty well-established companies, but what they tend to do is mould and flex accordingly. That the reason for their success is that they don't stand still, and they're always looking to develop. Not just in the subsidised sector, but even in the commercial. If fine dining isn't working, then you move to sort of relaxed dining and so on, and it's all the same. So it's understanding what audiences want and flexing accordingly. How does that sound, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's also the skill sets you kind of have as well. I mean, for me, like my marketing background is absolutely always front and center in my mind in terms of programming and producing and having audience front and center in them thoughts. So, I think it's how you can kind of flex, and sometimes I think it can be very kind of, well, if you're in that department, that's what you're in. But actually the skill sets that we develop primarily, I think, particularly in the arts, I think, you can easily flex into other areas of the arts, but then that skill sets will still stand you in good stead, and you can still use that in other areas as well, I think. And it helps, I think, for me, I've done lots of jobs in theatre in terms of like, I've worked in restaurants and bars and box offices and all that. And I think that understanding of how buildings work, I think is really valuable.
I absolutely agree. I think the often the most interesting programmers are those that have come through, or producers are those that have come through a different path. I remember Paul Cruz from Knee High, who was the exec there, he was a production manager for many years. Louise Jeffries at the Barbican was a production manager before she became latterly artistic director at the venue. And I always have a slight envy of marketers as well, and their knowledge that they bring to producing and programming as well, because you've always got the statistics to back up the reasons for doing things and the data, rather than just sort of that gut instinct. In terms of programming and so on, how much do you rely on data, or is it a lot to go with your gut?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's certainly never kind of 100%, statistical, because I think also you've kind of got to be looking for what you don't have in the statistics, if that makes sense as well. I think you've always, for me, it's always about looking at, where are the gaps, where are the audiences that we're not reaching, which will not be in a statistical analysis to that degree. I think, you can look at it against the makeup of the city you're working in, or the touring landscape that you're in, but I think you've got to be sort of seeing what's there and what isn't there in equal measure. So I think a lot of it is you need statistical, but also that's interesting working at somewhere like Home, because we kind of went into that with no statistics, because from a theatre perspective, it was the library theatre company that sort of merged with the Corner House to form Home, and the last when I joined, the last library theatre show had been 3.5 years prior, and it was a very different program of work to what Home was going to offer. So starting from a kind of literally a blank page was really fascinating, and building from there. So I would say certainly in the early days of Home, it was 100% gut feeling in that sense. And then that's that as sort of, you know, as we've got statistics and data, that's obviously come in. But I would still say it's more, you know, a larger percentage in terms of gut and you know, ultimately working with artists and talking with artists and seeing artists work to kind of help start to feel what the next, you know, the next progression for audiences are. So if you're kind of going, okay, we've you know done this kind of slate of work this season, they've done very well or not, but you know, how do you kind of progress the audience through that? And I think that's both, you know, stylistically, but also kind of, you know, the experiential of that as well, I think. So it's not always about, you know, for me, it's not always about bigger is better as well.
No, that's certainly something I've been aware of through various roles that I've been in. You program according to the size of the venue, of course, but in the commercial sector, bigger is better, and it's a really, really clear criteria. Fill as many seats as you possibly can, and you can either do that because you know that comedians always sell out, or so it's quite a simple calculation, and there's less to think about as such. It's either if it isn't going to sell, don't do it, or if it is going to sell, do it. Whereas something selling isn't the be all and end all of programming a venue such as Unity. So whereby ticket prices are much cheaper than many other venues around the country. So it isn't based purely on how much you can sell. It's also then what you're saying through what you're doing, who you're giving voice to. And so that's always something. If you can blend the two so that you can try and get a little bit of economic behind it, then of course, that's what we certainly need. But I would say that's the difference between the subsidised and commercial sector for me. Yeah,
for sure. And I think, you know, for us at home, because we are, you know, I still class home as brand new. You know, it's only 5 years old. It's also for us, you know, we're also trying to look at what that also might be in terms of, you know, just looking, I'm talking primarily in terms of presenting, but also producing in terms of, you know, looking after the artist as well, and that ecology, and that is really front and center of our talking and thinking right now. But you know, like that actually having longer runs and what are the deals and that side of it as well, which is, you know, for a long time, you know, needed addressing. So it's a chance. I'm not saying by any stretch that, you know, we have cracked that, but you know, I think that's where you start to look at it and start to change and move away from, you know, one nights and that touring ecology to 10 days, 2 weeks, you know, much longer runs to allow that. And that's where actually you can blend the what you just said, Gordon, in terms of the economics, you know, and the artistic through that, because that's where it starts to make sense. But, you know, so I think there's that side of kind of the ecology as well to keep always a firm focus on, I think.
And then before we come to questions, so we've got a fair few questions written down. I've printed them out, so if I'm looking down, it's because I'm reading them down from the desk. But before we come on to those, Kevin, have you got any top tips as such, or things that have stood by you? I can go first if you want.
Yeah.
Well, my first is it's very it's a general thing. It isn't really a specific. I will come on to specifics, but the first one is more about yourself and taking care of yourself as such. And I would say if you can be conscious of when you're using your ego. And by ego, I don't mean going around boasting and bragging, but using a particular part of your mind. Use it for different tools. So that small mind is really good for calculations and processes, but it isn't always necessarily the best place to come from when you're trying to communicate authentically with someone. And it's really important, I think, across life, but also for producers and programmers to build up relationships, as it is, you know, throughout the arts. But in these roles, it is about building relationships in order to take something forward. So if you can speak from a place of authenticity a little bit, that will help communications. It will help decision making. You know, you don't need to use that analytical mind to make all the decisions. It can help, but when it's sort of deeper decisions, I pop down a little bit lower in your thinking. A very specific one though would be to, and I think we both touched upon this, to understand the ecology of the arts, by which I mean learn what other people do, what other roles are. That moment of complicity, or Kevin, in your earlier career when you were in venues, you get to understand the machinations of how it works, rather than just sticking in on your own thing. I didn't always want to be an administrator. It's a brilliant role, but it was an opportunity as well, and I loved it at the time. It afforded me an opportunity to learn the other functions and see what other people were doing. And so I think if there is an opportunity for you to engage with, not necessarily work in, but engage with a venue or a touring company that's already established, then take that opportunity. Just find out what the different roles are and what people do. I also think, and we touched upon this, try to understand budgets. So on a small scale, try to understand budgets, because get to know what the roles are, but get to know what the budgets are behind the decisions that are made. We make our decisions based on the budgets. Home will do the same. Every company, venue, etc., will base it on the economic model. So understand the budgets. But as I was typing these, I said to my wife, who popped in to see me, and I said, well, what do you think of this? And she said, well, no, this is part of the problem, is that we're sticking to existing models of economics. And that, so I think there is a sense of looking out to what the broader models are and how we might be able to change those models moving forward. And we both mentioned this, that the successful companies and organizations are those that continuously look to be relevant and to progress and to flex. And again, I think that's the same with the economy. We can look to different economic models and advocate for those, so that there's a greater distribution of wealth towards the arts. The Arts Council of England receive as much subsidy as the German government give to Berlin alone each year. So we have to question why there isn't as much value being placed on the arts as there is in other countries. It's not to say that the arts is deserving of more money than other areas of the economy or society, such as schools, hospitals, etc. But it's questioning where the money in the system is going in the first place, and how more of that can be pulled down for public sector, for supporting organisations. So yeah, start off on the macro, understand the budgets, but I'm sorry that the micro, I'm afraid I went a bit macro there. And then I'm sure Kevin would say this: know your market. Who, if you're approaching home, make sure you're going to home with something that they might put on. Likewise, if you're going to ATG with a bit of product, or Unity or wherever, have a look at what's been on before. Get a sense of what it is that the venues produce. It's not to say that for us it's a bit different, because we promote innovative work. So if it's innovative and it's coming to us, great. We're looking for new things, but that's part of our programming policy. So understand the programming policy, and all it takes is a quick look on the website to understand really the kind of opportunities there are. That's me. And it's from you, Kevin.
Well, they're great. I'm trying them down. I think I went a bit more esoteric on mine when I was writing things down, rather specifically. I mean, I guess my sort of 2/3 things that at the minute, I was chatting to Matt Berman at Cambridge Junction a couple of months ago, and he used the phrase like "embrace not knowing," which I've kind of grabbed hold of late, and is my kind of favourite phrase that I'm overusing annoyingly. But I just think, yes, that's very prescient right now, but I just think kind of sometimes we can't always have the plan laid out to the nth degree. So I think actually kind of being okay with not knowing what the end point is of whichever aspect of what you're doing is, I think, is a really kind of good place to be, and that's where you can find opportunities within them spaces, rather than having it all kind of locked down 100% as a plan. And I'm really kind of a poster boy for that at the moment, with the current situation. My other one, which is kind of 2/3, which is kind of, I always see myself in a kind of on a sort of a ladder or on a line of the arts in life. And so my sort of two-pronged thing is kind of find your heroes, who sort of you look to. And I always have kind of a select amount in my head that would, where I would sort of think, what would they do in this situation and how would they approach this situation? And while I sort of say it's a two-pronged thing, is then on the other end is kind of that you've got to kind of keep the door open, and you've got to bring people with you, and make sure that you're allowing, from the position you're in, and I'm talking specifically from my point of view, that I can get as many artists access to the building and the opportunities we have as we possibly can. And so I feel really passionate about that, and that you kind of can't just kind of slam it behind you, go, great, I'm in, I'm off, and you've got to kind of be bringing people with you. Yeah. And I think the artist community, this is completely, speaking, preaching to the converted, that, artists are so brilliant at that, but we've got to keep that moving as well from a kind of venue perspective. So for me, I always see myself in the middle of that line. So I'm looking ahead and looking at my heroes and seeing what they would do, but I'm also looking behind and bringing people along, and kind of keeping people moving through that process as well. So I think they're my kind of, I went a bit more.
I think that's absolutely perfect, because on the other conversations, I missed one at the beginning with Ellie Cloughton, but I've been here for the others of these No One Way series, and it's something that comes up routinely, is that who are those people that you say, those that are your heroes as such, or those mentors, those people that guide, but also then who are the ones that you're bringing along. And I think that's something I learned early on. There were a couple of people, a guy called Michael Linus from Ambassador Theatre Group, Rachel Tackley, Ambassador Theatre Group, but also then she was English Touring Theatre to me, who were really, really key early on, because they unknowingly or knowingly, I don't know, but they felt like real champions and people you could ask for a bit of advice. And I think that it's really useful to take that attitude with other people, and see yourself as trying to support everyone, really, especially. Yeah. Should we go to some of the questions then? And if I blank on them, over to you. Are there particular touring networks that companies should look to get involved with to better reach venues and programmers? What's the best way of connecting with these? I can think of one off the top of my head to start off with, especially around Liverpool, Venues North, or actually another one, Big Imaginations, for family work, children's and family work. How about yourself, that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, Venues North is always a brilliant resource, and I was part of that kind of setup of that network from kind of in a previous life, through Harrogate. And I think what's brilliant about that is the resource of ultimately the kind of the Routes In guide, which gives you a breakdown of all the venues in the north of our network, what they're after. It just allows you to kind of completely hone kind of your approach, so rather than sending out 50 emails, find them 10. It's just saying what you said earlier, you go, the 10 venues that really chime with you and your work. And Venues North, off the back of that, there is the house network in the southwest, which is kind of the exact same principle but for the southwest. And there's one which I always forget the acronym of, I think it's STAMP, which is for London venues as well. So there's been a few of these pop up off the back of Venues North, which is, again, they all work in the same way, all have sort of similar resources, but are really brilliant one-stop shops. It just saves you kind of so much time plowing through websites or phone calls or emails or whatever. It just allows you to kind of go, right, there's 3 documents that allow you to get across the north of England, the southwest of England, and the London network in half a day, which is obviously the point of why they were set up. But they're just brilliant networks to get into for me.
And also, once you feel like you're managed to, or the rural touring as well. I think that's also a great one, and that's split up regionally. So depending on the area, so that you can, it isn't like there's only one opportunity to get on the rural touring network. There are many opportunities to do so. And again, I think it's probably just Googling these. That's the best way to connect. And they all say this is how we would like to receive details of your work. So like you would with any sort of job application, just if they ask for a CV, send a CV. If they ask for a letter, send a letter, or an application form. Just do whatever they're looking for. I would say though, think how you stand out. That's something that I've had to do throughout my career, but it's also what can you do to stand out? Because there are, I don't know about you. Well, I know about you. I can assume you get loads and loads and loads of people contacting you each week, if not every day, and a lot of it looks very similar. And it's so how can something stand out really? And that isn't always financial. You don't necessarily need the finances for it. It can be something else. You get the people who send you things like chocolate pig's hearts and things like that. I don't know, to promote their show or whatever. That can work sometimes. Certainly worked for me once upon a time in my first job. But I think it's what will give the best representation of what your piece of work is about. If you're going to go to the effort to write an email, tell us what it's about, who it's for, why it's for. Look at how other companies are presenting the work. And before you send an email and you don't feel confident, if you don't feel confident about it, send an email to the venue and say, or to another company that you really admire and say, have you got an example of an email that you might ordinarily send out? And as Kevin was saying, as I've been saying, people are willing to help others. So don't be afraid to ask for that support. That's certainly something I had to learn early on, is that I don't know everything. Just because you get into a position, it doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. So lean on others. I used to ring up people from other touring companies and ask them, how do I do this? And they would say, surely you know by now. But I didn't. I still don't.
Google's the greatest tool for me. I still sit in like meetings or, like kind of on phone calls, and I just have Google open because there's still so much stuff I just don't know and understand that I just have to Google mid phone call because, we're all kind of in that stream of just not having all the answers and not knowing really. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. No one knows it all. And I think that's, it's good to acknowledge.
This is a bit of a continuation of that. Which venues, apart from home and Unity, would you recommend to emerging mid-career artists when planning a tour, both in Northwest and elsewhere? I think I'd say look at those. It depends. It really depends. I don't think it is based on whether you're emerging or mid-career. I think it's based on what is your content. So therefore, I would look to the networks that we've suggested, see where companies that you're like or artists that you're like are playing, and go there accordingly. That would be my take. Do a bit of research on it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to kind of, what's the word? I have to disclaim, I hate the word emerging. I have lots of words in theatre that I hate, and emerging is kind of in my room 101. For me, you're an artist, right? There's no kind of emerging, you are an artist and you have made work. So for me, it's always about the work. It's not about the fact you're emerging or mid-career or long established. You're an artist, and that this could be your first show, it could be your 50th show. It doesn't matter. It's about the work and the intent of the work. So, Gordon's right. It's hard to kind of say, oh yeah, definitely approach them. It really depends kind of what it is you're doing, whether that's kind of very contemporary, or it's dance, or it's music, or it's classical, or whatever. It's going to depend. But hopefully them networks that we've mentioned will help you start to kind of hone them down and make approaches, because the theory is that everyone that signed up to them networks are open for them conversations and for them chats with artists.
Here's a good one for you. Are there differences in the way venues are programmed depending on geography and size?
Yeah, I mean, Manchester has a particular quirk because there is so many venues, and I'm sure Liverpool has this in a similar way as well. But for us in Manchester, we're always kind of trying to be wary about what it is we all do. So there's a clarity, hopefully, for artists, and there is always overlap. There is always going to be overlap. But when you have Home, Contact, The Exchange, Lowry, Z Arts, there's so many kind of venues around that we have to be really clear. So I think there is that element of being conscious for that. For me, I don't think there's enough cross northwest conversations that happen that I'm aware of. I think when I first started working at Home, and it was my first time working in the northwest, there was a real like, oh well, you kind of have to play Manchester or Liverpool, which I just never understood and still don't get. And I think you still get that from certain companies, but for me, I think it's perfectly fine, to kind of have both on your tour list, and why not? Because it's kind of far enough away into in terms of audience, but it's close enough in terms of the mechanics of touring. So I think that there needs to be more conversations opened up across the northwest, as a whole entity and as a whole unit. But there is always going to be, that, and that's why, again, going back to them networks, we're really clear on what work it is that we're looking for. But it's, but also it's about, for me as well, it's finding the right space, for that work as well. So it's not always as clear cut as, we have two spaces, Theatre 2 and Theatre 1. One is 130 seats and one is, 450. That's why we deliberately did never call it a studio or a main house, because that's also part of my theatre words 101. Because I think that becomes a stigmatizing word that you're a studio artist. So it's about finding the right space, and also that space might not be in the building. We present a lot of work site specifically and outside of the building, because it's about the experience, to allow an audience to experience your work in the best possible way. And we shouldn't be afraid of that either, in the arts. Does that answer that?
That sounds brilliant. Yeah, I'd go geography and size. I think I first learned that from my first programming role with the Ambassador Theatre Group, that say you'd be offered Cats, and you've got 12 venues, it can't go into every venue because of the size of the auditorium. Whereas other things can go into pretty much any auditorium size, and the decision isn't always down to you. It's a two-way conversation. So you might really want something for your venue, but the producer doesn't want to bring it to you because of the size of your venue. Geography does play a part, as you were saying there, Kevin, around about this sort of essence of it used to be around about, I don't know where it comes from. I think it might be barring clauses are based on 25 miles or something like that, and I don't know which art form that was focused in on, whether that was commercial touring or whether that was concerts or the like, but there's absolutely room for that. I mean, in the subsidised sector, not so much the commercial sector. Have you seen any particular change in trends in programming in recent years? Types of companies programmed, deals made, support given?
I think so. I think it's, I keep saying, I think at the moment, from when I first entered the industry to where we are now, I think the openness of venues is incredible, and the accessibility to venues is incredible. And yes, that's not everybody, and etc. But I think certainly the main colleagues and venues that I work very closely with, are very open and very kind of open for them conversations with artists about their work and about their development and about the opportunities they're putting out, much more than it was when I first kind of started working in theatre. Certain venues were just like, we do this, we just don't really care about the rest of the arts, college in terms of the artists, because we do this. Whereas that has been a huge shift, and I think you've seen all of them kind of drawbridges of venues lowered, and you can pretty much get out of these networks primarily, but you can email people and get a phone call or go and meet for a coffee, or maybe not right now meet for coffee, but hopefully again soon. But you can have them honest conversations about who you are as artists, what work you're making, and what the venue is doing, and how they're operating. So I think that's been a massive shift over the last well, I mean, probably not that long, maybe over the sort of last 5 or 7 years, but you know, it's huge, and for the better, I have to say, obviously.
So conscious, we've been doing quite a bit about programming, but also then the experience of producing. We'll come on to, maybe if we tackle this one from well, we'll do one more question here, then we'll go to the chat, and then we'll finish off with some of the questions asked here. And by producing, just I can't see everyone that's on the call, but just to make it really clear, difference between programming is that programming, you have a venue or venues, or spaces, or an ethos as such, and you may not have somewhere to program. You might be programming outdoors, but you have a vehicle for choosing things that you would like to put onto your platform, and it's not really the things that you're creating. It's something that other people have created. So Unity is a mixed approach. Home's a mixed approach, but other venues are quite clearly just programmed. And if it were a shop analogy, it would be you go to a shop and the bakers make their own bread, or the bakers buy the bread in. And it's that kind of thing. So from if I go from maybe we tackle this both ways then. So tips on negotiating a good deal as a programmer, Kevin, and I'll take the producing angle.
As in, from an artist perspective, you mean?
No, from your perspective as a programmer, how do you negotiate a good deal? And then I'll take the other end and be the producer.
Without, you know, for me, a good deal, you know, you have to work it kind of on both ends. So, you know, a good deal for me is, you know, does it work for the venue and does it work for the artist and the company? And therefore, if it's a yes on both sides, then it's a good deal and it's the right deal. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, for me, it's always about having an open transparency on both sides of that, because I think too often venues can be seen as these kind of, you know, clandestine kind of organizations that are operating in the shadows, trying to, you know, fleece kind of artists to get as much money out of them as they can. And, you know, and again, maybe a lot do that, but I think, you know, an open transparency about, you know, what are the costs for the company in terms of coming in to the building. You know, obviously the venue has costs as well, and you have to work that through, you know. And, you know, I remember when we brought Hot Brown Honey over from Australia, you know, we had lots and lots of really open, honest conversations around that to really find a deal that kind of really worked for both sides of that. And I think that's the key to really operating it. And I think a lot of venues on Hot Brown Honey had really struggled to kind of make the finances work when you're talking about bringing over a company of 20 people, you know, from Australia for, you know, a length of time. But it's about both working to the end, because, you know, we don't want a company to come in and lose loads of money. Obviously, we don't want to lose loads of money. But what we both want is to present the work and for an audience to experience that work. So you have to work together, and it has to be seen as a partnership for it to be a good deal. Otherwise, it's just weighted either way. And it also equates the power dynamic as well, I think, for me, to have them conversations that you're not just, you know, too often the venue is seen to have all the power in them negotiations, and it should be an absolutely equitable conversation, because it has to work for both sides for it to be a good deal.
Yeah, I absolutely concur. Has to work for both. From a producing point of view, I always felt, I say in the past because I'm a producer for a bit, but you need to know what the deal is beforehand, before you even start creating the piece of work. You've got to be conscious that you can't create it too big and have hundreds of thousands of pounds or tens of thousands of pounds or thousands of pounds, whatever the amount is that you're working in, and go to a venue and expect them to pay for that if that isn't the sort of thing that they've got the capacity in their auditorium to pay for. They might take it based on the fact that your work is exceptional and they want you regardless. But that isn't always the case. So know the sorts of deals that venue is likely to offer as well. And again, the venues north, all the venues in venues north outline what sort of deals they do. And by deals, that's what you get and what the venue gets. So that could be that you take a box office split, which is usually weighted in your favour, 80-20, 70-30. Don't quite know what they do at home, but, or guarantees that somebody might give you, say it costs you £1,000, they might give you £1,000 to do it. Or a first call where you say, okay, this is based on box office. We'll take a risk. We as a venue will take a risk on you as a company, but we're not so sure of you. So you take your first £1,000, we'll take the next 500, and so on. So understand the deals that the venues are taking, that they offer, and tailor your ask accordingly. If you go in with a big guarantee, chances are 5 emails have come in that afternoon around about programming them that you may just be forgotten. So I would go in and don't say, well, it's up to you. I suppose if you're fresh, don't say this is exactly what we're expecting. Say, can we have a conversation about this? I think you want to get them hooked on the idea first, rather than hooked on what the costs are. That would be my take. Some would say differently. Some would say, well, be upfront, say exactly what it is that the piece is worth. But I think if you're working with reputable organisations, they will always get to a point of negotiating a fair and equitable deal. Otherwise, what's the point of going to that venue? And then it's finding the path of least resistance. Don't thrash it out over the absolute minute detail with venues. You want to build relationships with venues, so the deal isn't the be all and end all. By all means, don't lose money, and don't do yourself a disservice, but don't be too picky about little things. Stand up for your rights, of course, but know that different venues are different to each other. That some will have barring clauses, some will offer you towels, others won't. And learn to compromise on bits that you can compromise on would be my take as a producer. So we'll go to a question here then. One from Zach, that Emma says is a good question. So how do you go about looking for your creative teams when in-house producing, and what are the main things you need to think about when looking for performances? So I think that's 2 questions in a way. One's about producing, the way I'm reading it, and forgive me if I'm wrong. One's about producing, and then the other is when looking for performances. I think that might be when choosing production. So it might be the same one and the same question.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's a 2 sort of pronged approach really. So the director would kind of have a set kind of group maybe that they want to work with, in terms of primarily usually designer or lighting. So people they've worked with a lot and like to work with a lot, so they might want to bring them on board with them. For us, we're always trying to look at the balance and blend of the teams, not least to try and look at the Northwest Manchester kind of representation of that, because it's important for us that we kind of don't just kind of have that usual theatre thing that everyone just lives in London, so that's where you have to go to get your creative teams from, and that we start to have an environment in the Northwest where creatives can work and can thrive and can get regular work. So we always look at that blend, as well as representation is always incredibly important for us on our creative teams as well. And also you've got to look potentially sometimes for specialisms as well. You might need a certain aspect that's more weighted to sound or lighting, depending on what it is you're doing. But we kind of have a kind of rolling database and knowledge base of people, and they're either web links or CVs that we kind of hold to always recap on that every time that we're looking for new creative teams as well.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It's when you're choosing a production, it's a combined conversation. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Some people are very much, this is my idea and we're going to go with this, and that's fine. But there are organisations where it becomes a bit of a collective decision. And for example, in a regional rep, as the old, we don't have those anymore, but so the big 10 to 12 or 13, I think it is now, touring venues in the country, or producing venues in the country, they'll tend to elect a project based on either the performer, the production, i.e. the script, or the director, and whoever comes first. And then each one then brings along with it either a creative team, and I think it's the responsibility of organisations. So when I was at the Everyman and Playhouse, we insisted on people from Liverpool being seen for casting. So it wasn't always just the cast members that particular director had always worked with. Interestingly, when you do that, you see that the actors from Liverpool then sometimes follow that director around the country as well, and they get a job in Bristol or in London and so on. And so I think that's really key in this as well, as seeing that whilst you might be located in an area, this is a profession where there is a necessity, not always, not for everyone, but for many, to be able to see their work as work that doesn't just play in their area. That there is a requirement for either funding or for income or for reputation building, that you need to play different areas around the country. So I think any opportunity that you can do to link into that notion of playing elsewhere, of meeting people from elsewhere, will broaden your opportunities. And in terms of creative teams, when at Frantic Assembly, they were very, very clear with what it was that they wanted to produce, but they always seemed to have a knack of bringing in someone who brought something additional to the party. Working with either a pop, not necessarily a big pop star, but working with a well-known musician to come in and work on the piece, or working with someone from a theatre company that was different to them, or a writer that had that was renowned, or the like. There is a sense of, when you're choosing your creative teams, who pushes you on, rather than it always being about working with the same group of people. Working with the same group of people is fantastic because you have a shorthand, you understand each other, but who's going to push you as an artist by coming in and collaborating? And that doesn't have to be that they're there for the whole 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the process. It might be that they just come in as a consultant or something like that. But think who can push you, and when selecting your team.
It's not always from in industry as well. I mean, the last production we did before we closed, in St. Animals with Bourgeois and Reese, the makeup and costume were by high fashion design.
Yeah.
They'd never worked in theatre before, but that aesthetic and their knowledge was absolutely on point, for that production. And again, it pushes you in a different way because they're not theatre literate, they had to be, but so they kind of come in with different ideas about why you're doing that, what about this, what about that. So it's not always within industry either.
No, it can also open you to new audiences as well. So I remember we did a piece many years ago with the Pet Shop Boys, who were quite popular back then. It was a piece of theatre with them, outdoors, but that brought a whole new audience to that work. The people that wanted to come out and see the Pet Shop Boys. We'll go to another one on here. Do you think the reliance of companies on Edinburgh to get booked, which prices lots of us out, will change post-pandemic? I think so. I hope so. I think that some venues are acutely aware of that. I'm not sure it necessarily is a post-pandemic thing. I think it's something that has been growing amongst venues. I program some work from what's happened in Edinburgh, but that isn't always the case. And indeed, a lot of the work that's in Edinburgh doesn't really rely or suit what we're doing. I'm sure the same is true for you, Kevin. Some is, some isn't. So it isn't the be all and end all. I think there are other ways of communicating with venues and getting your work seen. those ways then could be applying for certain schemes that those venues are operating. We spoke about networks, but there are also schemes that venues are operating. And I think post-pandemic, this will be the change. They'll be rolling those out with greater emphasis, because there's a real sense amongst venues that of how do we support the whole ecology, and how do we make it feasible for artists to continue in their practice. And the cost of Edinburgh is sizable for many and a barrier for many. So venues such as Home and Unity are historically about pulling down those barriers. So we'll be looking to find ways of supporting artists to go through that. I'd say log on to our website, in the upcoming months to see the schemes that are being considered at the moment. We've consulted with artists about this, so some of you will have heard about it. But so yeah, I think Edinburgh's a risk. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, Edinburgh's on my list, I'm afraid, as well, of Theatre 101 words. I think and it's going to be interesting. We'll have to change because it's not happening. And I've been kind of advocating Edinburgh to do a kind of Glastonbury model of take a year off for a long time, because just to kind of go the industry, and by the industry I mean the venues, need to take a long hard look at themselves of how they go about that, because this kind of relentless treadmill of you've kind of got to go to Edinburgh, and if you don't go to Edinburgh then you don't get a tour, and you don't get and everything is built around making that show for Edinburgh has to change, and we all have to take responsibility for that as a venue collectively in the UK. So it will have to change. It has to change, and hopefully for the better. But I also think Edinburgh needs to have a look at itself. Some of the horror stories I've heard about landlords not refunding kind of rents on stuff that have been paid, and the escalation of rent costs for flats and accommodation, and then therefore the knock-ons of just living is just astronomical, and it's then becoming far too elite, and then it's about who can afford it, and then that becomes a certain kind of demographic to access that, which then creates a kind of complete, and then if the majority of venues are going, well, I only go to Edinburgh, then that creates a really disjointed presentation of work across the country. So as venues, you have to, I always kind of say you have to kind of just do one thing that hopefully helps change things, and for me, Edinburgh, I enjoy Edinburgh, but I enjoy it for the conversations with people more so than the seeing work. But as venues, we have to get out and we have to see work. The interesting dichotomy of that at the moment is you can't get out and see anything because you can't leave your house, let alone that there isn't even any work on. So that also has to be addressed right now as well. So there's a kind of double thing that's happening for venues right now, and therefore it has to be about that real contact with companies to really talk to them and understand them. And for me, a lot of the time, it's about the the ethos of a company and their attitude. For me, go back to that gut. That is pretty much 85% of how I operate. Because it's not always about this is this big smash hit show and it's a sellout and great, we'll kind of keep programming you because you brought the goods. It's about the ethos and supporting that company through a kind of 3 to 5 year journey, across that. And there'll be missteps, both from a venue perspective and us, but that's all part of the process. And, and you've got to commit to that as a venue. You've got to commit to long-term relationships, and you've got to commit to artists on that level, and not just go, okay, what's kind of had the 5-star reviews at Edinburgh, right, okay, I'll program them. And then I'll come back next year and do it all over again. It's a broken model. I can talk for another hour on brokenness of Edinburgh.
Maybe we'll do that offline. I think on that as well. The frustration, having been a producer and running companies, is, well, we can't afford to go to Edinburgh, or we will only take the financial risk. And this was running well-established companies. We couldn't afford to go to Edinburgh. So when you do go to Edinburgh, do you do it around certain moments, such as when there's a British Council showcase? So that happens every other year. So will there be programmers more suited to you? in Edinburgh at that point. So do you go then? But even if you go then, you might not be seen. So then it comes down to working with companies like New Diorama or Unity or Home. But you might feel, well, I've been knocking on that door of that venue for years and years and years, and I never get seen because the ethos doesn't seem to match with that program. I would say in Kevin and myself, we don't program based on our personal likes as such. We program on for a variety of reasons, and those are apparent then in the programs. They're based on quality of performance. They're based on the ethos of the companies or the artists. They're based on the stories they have to tell, the way in which they want to say them, and it tends to be much more by rather than about particular voices. So if you're not getting it, if you're knocking on a door and you're not getting through, there is a sense of going to find another door as well. And don't just bemoan the fact that your local theatre isn't showing you. You've got to front up and go, all right, well, where else do I go? Who do I go to next? And so it could be the New Diorama in London, for example, that you go to, or another place. And then chances are, sooner rather than later, your local theatre that you were knocking on will go, oh, right, okay, they're ready. But also, it isn't a closed conversation. Just because you came with something once doesn't mean that that's it and that's it forever. Come back with something fresh. It might be that in that moment, you have a production about the environment, and there are 3 already programmed for that season about the environment. So don't take it too personally. Come back again and again with other ideas, and know that there are as many pressures on venues in selecting things as there are on artists on choosing what to do.
I'd also say, if you are banging on the door or applying for a lot of stuff and not getting, reach out, certainly talking very personally, email me, as well. I'm always happy to have them conversations, kind of in depth, even if it's to say, okay, the nature of the work and the underpinning of all the work you want to do does not fit home, but I will absolutely, take the time to talk to you about what venues would be and the approaches they're in, and to help and to kind of do that, even if it's not necessarily 100% the right fit for home. But I would say, make that phone call or send that email or whatever, tweet, whatever, and open the door to that person.
Here's one for you, Kevin. And then I'll try and think about it as well. So it's from Kitchen Sink Live. They're a company based here in Liverpool who've strong connections with Unity. While funding and opportunities, they came through a talent development program that we run with 20 Stories High. While funding and opportunities are scarce, what advice would you give to, you won't like this word, emerging theatre companies? So what advice would you give to perhaps newer theatre companies moving forward, whilst the funding and opportunities are scarce?
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge. I would say that if you have your kind of list of ideal venue partners, whether that's existing or ones you would hope to have in the future, I would absolutely make sure you're signed up to their mailing list, social media feeds, whatever combination that they're running, to see what opportunities will be coming out and how they can apply. I'd also take the time, like I said, to reach out to people who maybe you haven't got the relationship with right now, but you want to start, so you can spend some time doing that. I'd also say chat to other artists, that are going through it, and have some support networks around that and shared knowledge around that as well. And I'd also see kind of what else you might be able to offer, again, going back to what I was saying about that kind of equality of that kind of power shift and power dynamic. What could you offer, let's just say home because I'm talking, but what could you offer home in the sense of, you might want to run a training course, or you want to get involved in this, like make an offer to us. We don't have all the answers, so there might be something where you're going, we could absolutely do this, and make that approach as well. Don't be afraid, and that might be workshops or online training or whatever that might be, but make that approach as well. And that's another way in that is in this strange time where we can't necessarily fully do live performances in the way we'd like to. I would say off the top of my head, I think it's a big issue, and it's a crux of where we are right now, and I don't necessarily have the kind of like silver bullet of like that's what it is.
I,
Yeah.
I think stay in touch, remind venues that you exist, because this is a long period of not programming and for venues being closed. So remind venues that you exist. Drop them a line, ask how they're going, how they're doing, let us know what you're up to. And it could be that you're not working on anything at the moment artistically, that you've taken a job somewhere else, that you've taken a job outside the arts, as many people have all the time anyway. But I would say make sure that you're in the best position moving forward, to be able to create art. If you're unable to make it at the moment, you're in the best position to be able to do so moving forward, and whether that's looking after your physical, mental, or financial health. You've got to do what you need to do in order to build the foundations for moving forward. We'll go to a couple of others. Sorry, Kevin, there's loads. I hope you're all right.
Oh, yeah.
This practical one. I've a recording of my work, but it's low quality. Would you recommend I send this alongside a programming pack to give programmers an idea of the production, or will it not reflect on my work well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say something is better than nothing is always my kind
Great.
of default kind of setting on that. And I think, from my perspective, and certainly talking on behalf of other programmers and venues that I know well, we know that we understand the limitations of, that we, even how, none of us can knock out NT Live quality kind of thing. So something is better than nothing because it gives you a sense of it, particularly at this time. And I think it's about how you just craft the other stuff around that as well. I mean, one of the best approaches I've ever had was Bootwork sent me a 5-minute YouTube clip, and it was them just talking around the project, sketches of designs. It was, for a show that hadn't been made yet, and talked specifically about home and how it would tie in to the program, and we think this will happen, and little models and stuff like that. But just talked around it, really brought it to life, in a really kind of lo-fi, low-tech way. And kind of had maximum impact, and I always kind of think about that to this day, obviously. And I think stuff like that can really help around stuff, but certainly don't be worried about sending a low quality video out. Send it, because I'd rather see that and look through the low quality, if that makes sense, because I still want to see something. Does that make sense?
Absolutely concur. Send what you've got, because everyone's got able to put the logos on their work to say Arts Council funded. Well, we don't know what that means. There are various stamps that people put on to show their credentials. So reviews, etc., are always important, and comments. But seeing the work is much more helpful to get a sense of what stage you're at with the work. As artists, and whether that's something that is right for us, whether that's something we might want to help develop. So be honest, be authentic, send it through. I think it's what we were saying about early on when we were doing that little bit about careers as such and career paths. When you can be authentic, that helps substantially. It isn't always the path to achieving what you want to do, but it's better if you can align what you're doing. So be authentic in what you're sharing. I'll go with this one first, and then Kevin, if you want to chip in on it. When programming is shown, what is your main consideration? Is it audiences or relationships with the artist, for example? Main consideration for me is audience. I think that's probably because I started off working in the commercial sector, but also knowing that there are a variety of audiences. I've never programmed based on what I like. I base programmed on, nor indeed just what will sell. So there are a variety of reasons, but I think you have to think of the audience. Otherwise, why are you doing it? It has to be a two-way conversation, at which point then you have to think about the artists. And thinking about audiences isn't always thinking what's going to sell the most tickets. It's about who are the audiences, where do the audiences come from, and how do I then attract those audiences, or how do we share something new with audiences? So each venue has very different programming remits, but I would say the majority would say that the audience is key, because that's the reason you're doing it. Kevin, you might differentiate with
Yeah,
me.
no,
I was not saying I don't consider the artist, but it's a conversation. It's a nuanced approach.
I agree. I think for me and for home, I would say it's kind of 50-50. I would say, I
Yeah.
think the audience and the artist are of equal importance. And like I was saying earlier, kind of certainly that long-term relationship with a company is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and I've said it about my past, my past, the marketing, audience are always in there, and it's about, is that an existing audience that home already has? Is that an audience that we're not tapping into right now, but we should be? But also that has to go kind of hand in glove with who are the company, what are they about, what have they set up to do, what is the work that they're doing? And that's the kind of two-way, kind of route on both sides of that we can keep that kind of evolution of a company kind of going through the building over a long term and in different ways as well. So they're both of equal importance, for me. And that's why why I love it. And then there's nothing better than then seeing that audience really come in and respond. And for me, and it might sound a bit overly grand, but it's not always about the numbers of audiences as well. It's about that kind of build and growth across time with a company as well, and supporting the company through that. And for us, it's really allowing that freedom on a company as well, that we can kind of got your back on that, because we are committing to it long term. It's not to say that as an artist you have to commit long term to us, because there's a lot of venues out there and you may want to sort of go elsewhere, but for us it's always important to go into it with that mindset.
Absolutely. And I would flip the question then with my producing hat on, of not for venues but for independent companies, is what's the main consideration for you? Is it audiences? Is it you as a company? Is it servicing your artistic need? And I think as you've got to, again, have a blended approach in terms of who you're creating the work for. You might have to express something, but then think about who the audience is in that moment. Don't forget the audience. Matt Zia yesterday said about that Peterborough moment. When do the audience start opening up their sweet wrappers? So think of the audience, and again, in newer companies, quite often you see this, that there's a real neglect of what the audience wants, and venues have to take that into consideration. So have that in your mind, and then also think in terms of relationships. As Kevin was saying, how do you build those relationships? So to be lasting and meaningful with venues when they're looking to give you that opportunity. We've got time for one more question because we're already over our time. But we can both give a quick one on this. Do you think it is harder to produce or program in the Northwest or program in the Northwest?
Is it hard? I suppose is it harder in the Northwest than where? I suppose.
Then I presume the suggestion would be London or the Southeast or other areas of the North.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the minute it's only hard in the sense of there's so many amazing artists, there's so many amazing companies, and there's so many amazing venues and spaces being used and popping up. I think that's the hard thing. And sometimes the hard thing for me is fitting it all in. There's always, whenever we put a season out, there's another almost season behind that of work that I would have been desperate to present in the building. I think that's the hard thing, without being too kind of evangelical, in that sense. I think the Northwest is, I've never experienced a kind of an area with this richness of talent, with the political edge, with the kind of creativity of the artists and the companies working in this region. So it's only hard from a kind of positive perspective for me. And I think the more I talk to other venues and in other areas and other regions, people do look to the Northwest to see who's coming out of there, which is brilliant. So that gaze, from my perspective, is moving away from what are London doing and what's happening in London or wherever, to what is it that's happening in Manchester. And I think that cultural revolution that's been happening and will continue to happen with more things, more venues popping up, more companies, and I think because of the burgeoning scene, more companies are relocating, I think, to Northwest. You know, the amount of emails I get which start, we've just moved to Manchester or wherever, you know, from London, from Bristol, whatever, it is amazing. So it's creating just a whole amazing world of artists.
And I would say that I think there are different challenges depending on where you are. So I wouldn't say that one place is harder than the other. If I think, indeed, I think it's difficult to say the Northwest because I think Manchester is a different theatre or sorry, arts ecology to Liverpool. I would say that there are particular challenges for Liverpool, and that is that there's a wealth of voice, but there isn't always the producing skill set within organisations, within companies, etc. Or there are various skill sets that aren't being utilised. And I think in order to push the work forward, and I think that more where we can collaborate with one another as artists and so on, I think that might help drive things forward a little bit. So opportunities to pool resources, opportunities to collaborate. When we're talking about which creative teams do you use, start using each other amongst the emerging artists. Start using each other, which you do already, but I would say lean on each other. And the bit for me that's missing a little bit is in Liverpool, Kevin, this is that sort of tapping into producing support. So where you can use these skills sessions, for example, or other skill sessions that are available. We're running ones on business courses and so on how to understand business behind it. It's all free, it's all accessible, and other venues and organisations do that. So if that's a blind spot, learn it. Don't just keep on ploughing on with what you know and hope for the best. There is a sense of actually analyse what it is you do and where the flaws are and the gaps, not the flaws, sorry, the gaps are, and learn how to fill those in. Rach has shared some details there in the chat about the No One Way event series, but also other ways in which Unity can help. And there's also ones indeed where Home can support that. We haven't really addressed too much about the current climate, but it's a difficult one to incorporate within what we're talking about at the moment with the timescale that we have, Kevin. So I think, any final words before we hand back over to Rach?
No, I was just going to say, I think, you know, to Rachel, whoever, like, please pass my details on to everyone, or if anyone needs them to get them through. I'm always more than happy to talk about the work that Home does. I'm also happy to, you know, I do a lot of sessions with artists about deals, because, you know, I was going to, you know, flag this earlier in terms of the deal side of things. There's so many kind of weird and wonderful deals out there. I'm always happy to talk with companies, whether we're working with them or not, around deals and getting the best deals and going about what it all means, because again, there is a lot of theatre speak in the deal world of guarantees versus the split versus the first call, blah, you know, blah blah blah. What the hell does that mean? So I'm always happy to kind of debunk and demyth on stuff like that and other stuff besides. So I guess Rachel passed my details on, or whatever the great combination, you know, whatever that combination is. So and get in touch, keep in touch.
And I'd agree. Please get in touch with myself as well as Kevin to ask any questions. I think debunking is really interesting. What we've given probably is an overview, but within that there would have been a lot of language that doesn't necessarily register immediately with you, because it's stuff that I won't suggest how old Kevin is, but we've been doing it for a while, I should imagine. So they're just terminology that just one uses. And shorthand that one uses, but we can readily explain what that means in other terms. So please do get in touch with us as well if that's something that would be of use to you. All right, Rach, over to you.
Quick one to say thank you both so much. I'm very fortunate that I've worked with both of you in Home and Unity, and I think I tweeted this, but I think your commitment to artists is just like second to none as individuals, and how you bring that to your organisation. So thank you so much for sharing that with everybody today. It's been really, really interesting to listen to. And then thank you to everyone who joined us as well. Just a very quick sign off to say that we'll be dropping you all an email with a recording of the session, the transcript, but also an overview with links to some of those resources that were discussed, some of those networks to join in, and we'll also share contact details. So if there's anything that comes to you in the middle of the night after you've listened to this, drop us an email. I have shared 4 links there in the group as well. The first link is to the upcoming events in this series. So we've got everything from directors, artistic directors, performers and devisers all coming up in the No One Way event series. I've also popped a link to our How We Can Help page. This is a very broad, open web page on Unity's website. Basically, any worries you've got, any ideas you have, please just submit them. You know, both Kevin and Gordon reference relationships quite a lot throughout this call. And I think, you know, we're here to encourage you to build relationships with us, but it's also definitely on us to try and build them with you. So we hope the resources that we're trying to offer really make that a two-way conversation. And the last 2 links are to Home's website, some of the theatre work that they're putting out, their Homemakers scheme, definitely check it out. And also how you can get involved with the support that they're offering, they offer surgeries and the like. So yeah, use these resources, they're great. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kevin and Gordon, that was great. Now we'll do the awkward Zoom goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye.